I was first introduced to the 19th century American artist-explorer John Stanley in my youth on a visit to the Buffalo History Museum in Buffalo, New York. The introduction came by way of viewing Mr. Stanley's monumental work, The Trial of Red Jacket, a fixture on exhibit at the museum. Painted in 1869, The Trial of Red Jacket portrays the noble Seneca Indian leader and celebrated orator Sagoyiwata, known as Red Jacket, defending himself before a tribal council in 1802 against wrongful accusations of witchcraft. I recall looking up in awe at the sprawling 6 by 9 foot wide canvas stretched out large as life. Dramatically lit, the rich colored, detailed scene appeared so realistic that I imagined hearing Red Jacket's eloquent words of defense. Although familiar with the painting's storyline from history lessons, I was unaware of who the artist was, nor did I imagine that our paths would eventually cross. John Stanley was born on January 17, 1814, in Canandaigua, New York, once the heart of Seneca territory. In 1816, his family moved 80 miles west to the shore of Lake Erie in the village of Buffalo, New York, where he lived until 1828. At that time, Sagoyiwata and the Senecas lived on reservation land allotments just south of the village along Buffalo Creek. Living in proximity to the Seneca reservation during his pre-teens, Stanley would have known of the old chief's reputation and the history of the Seneca Indians. In 1832, at 18 years of age, Stanley was back in Buffalo, training as a house and sign painter. But after the death of his father in 1834, he moved again, this time to Detroit, where he began to study portrait painting. In 1853, when John Stanley hired on as an artist with the Isaac Stevens Survey to determine a northern railway route from St. Paul, Minnesota to the Puget Sound, he had already traveled and painted a vast area of the West. Choosing to paint with oils mainly in his studio, Stanley traveled with a daguerreotype camera, watercolor paints, and a field sketchbook. As the Stevens expedition journeyed westward, crisscrossing the Milk River through Blackfeet territory, Stanley quickly befriended Indians by capturing the sun in his daguerreotype portraits and often presenting the sitter with their very own photo portrait. Stevens mentioned the use of daguerreotypes in his report, that at Fort Benton, Montana Territory, the Blackfoot and Gros Ventre Indians considered Mr. Stanley was inspired by their divinity, the sun, and he thus became, in their eyes, a great medicine man. Recognized as a valuable member of the expedition, Stanley proved his worth on September 11, 1853, when he was asked to split from the Stevens camp on the Marias River near Fort Benton and head north into the heart of Blackfeet country. Guided by Pagan chief Little Dog and accompanied by an interpreter and 3 voyageurs from the American Fur Company, his task was to arrange a peace council with Pagan chief Lohorn, who was thought to be camped in the Cypress Hills across the line in British territory. While there, Stanley took portraits of the tribe and persuaded Lohorn, along with 30 lodges, to return to Fort Benton, where a peace treaty was brokered on September 21st. According to Isaac Stevens' report, Stanley had traveled over 160 miles and back in 11 days. While traveling and conducting business, he also made sketches of the country and the Pagan. On his return trip to Fort Benton with Little Dog and Lohorn, Stanley passed by the 3 buttes of the Sweetgrass Hills. On the plains just south of East Butte, he participated in and recorded a Blackfeet buffalo hunt. It was there that I would cross paths with the artist a second time. A few years ago, I purchased a lithograph print entitled Blackfeet Indians, 3 Buttes. The scene was captured looking northward from just south of Haystack Butte, an igneous outlier of East Butte. In the lower corner of the print, the name Stanley Dell appeared. Through research, I discovered the lithograph had come from a copy of Isaac Stevens' 1860 narrative and final report, illustrated by John Stanley. During my time exploring and photographing in the borderlands, I have crisscrossed and circumnavigated the Sweetgrass Hills numerous times. On one trip in the autumn of 2018, 165 years after Stanley documented the buffalo hunt on his journey, and more than half a century after my first viewing of his painting The Trial of Red Jacket, I found the approximate location of his vantage point for making the illustration Blackfeet Indians, Three Buttes. Though fenced with wire and posted now, the arid, grassy landscape still appears much as it did to John Stanley, sans buffalo. Once again, I stood in awe at a sprawling canvas stretched out before me. This time, the scene was real.